Kerry Connelly. Yeah, she is an emerging voice in the world of progressive Christianity. She's a sought after speaker and coach. She's the author of Good White Racist Confronting Your Role in Racist Injustice. Kerry has over 25 years of business experience in corporate, nonprofit, faith, and direct sales arenas. She brings that experience to her coaching clients, her writing, her speaking. She writes the popular blog Jersey Girl Jesus on patheos.com. Her first book, Pause, Making Time to Walk with God, is available exclusively at Barnes& Noble. Kerry is a New York City Leadership Center Fellow and is certified in Christian life coaching, DISC personality assessments, and so much more. She has a BA in English with a concentration in creative writing from Montclair University and a Master of Divinity from Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis. And that's where we were connected because on one occasion I was invited about 5 years ago to be a guest of her cohort, her class at that seminary. And so I've been able to be in touch with some of the students over the past few years, and she's one that really shines. And I think you'll know what I'm talking about quite readily. All right, Kerry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Moore, for inviting me to be here today. And I have to tell you that my cohort and I still talk about the time you came to visit. So it was a meaningful experience for us. And thank you to all of you for showing up today to hear what I have to say. I so appreciate the opportunity to be here. So today I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a pretty embarrassing story. So you're going to kind of get to know the worst of me. And I'm going to start off with one of my favorite scriptures. It is from the Message, which is also my favorite translation of the Bible. Scholars would hate that, but it's true. The scripture that I want to start off with is Matthew 11:28-30. And it goes like this. It's Jesus talking to the people, and he says, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." I love that scripture so much. So I recently graduated from seminary with a Master of Divinity, a huge accomplishment and one that I am, of course, very proud of. I confess, however, that although my time in seminary was life-changing and meaningful, there was one serious blot on my time there, actually two, if I'm going to be honest, because you see, early on in seminary, probably around the second semester, a certain professor who we'll call Scott, because that's his name, he had the audacity and the nerve to give me an A- in one of my classes. Now, this is a problem because I suffer from a complex called A+ student perfectionism. It's a serious disorder comprised of symptoms such as not being able to relax, working myself to the bone, overcommitting, and refusing to believe in my own inherent worth as a human being unless I am perceived as perfect by those people around me. So with that one tiny little dash after that A, Scott had rocked my world and knocked my perfect 4.0 to a frustratingly imperfect 3.95. Every semester after that, as I racked up more and more perfect scores, I would hit the refresh button over and over again, hoping that that ridiculous 3.95 GPA would miraculously move a tenth of a point closer to my perception of perfection. I was obsessed. It was pretty ridiculous. Over the years in seminary, of course, Scott ended up becoming a really good friend. And he's one of those kinds of teachers that could move me to tears, quite literally, in the classroom with his passion and his care. He always challenged me to do better and to be better. And he was probably more pastoral, if I'm going to be really honest. He was probably more of a pastor to me than many of the pastors I've had in my life in church. Appropriately, I had him for my very last class at Christian Theological. And do you believe that that man actually had the nerve to once again give me a B minus on a paper? And that resulted in, you guessed it, another A minus on my final transcript. Scott had the nerve to disrupt all of my delusions of perfection, leaving me with a final GPA of 3.98. Now, of course, a 3.98 is something to be proud of. I understand that, right? But if you suffer from the illness of perfection, like I do, it's the kind of thing that's going to really bother you. And it didn't even matter to me that I had accomplished this during some of the hardest years of my life, in which both of my parents' health began to fail in catastrophic and chaotic ways. And I became their primary caregiver, traveling regularly 2 hours from my home in New Jersey to theirs in Pennsylvania to manage their doctor's appointments and to manage their home and pay their bills and just overall manage their health and their well-being. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Now, it gets worse. I'm about to tell you a story. This is the embarrassing part. In my defense, I will tell you that in all of the years of seminary, 2020, my last year, was the hardest. It was December 21st, and my dad had just finally passed away just a few weeks before, after a very long, very difficult, drawn-out decline. Just as COVID had hit about a year before that, we'd had to put my mom in a home because she suffers from dementia. My dad couldn't go with her, and he only saw her once in that last year of his life because of COVID. He couldn't live independently anymore. And so I was running my coaching and consulting business from my home. I was taking care of my family. I was writing. I was in seminary. COVID had hit. It was a really tough year. I was not at my best. I was exhausted. I was emotionally drained. I was frayed at the edges, and I had nothing left in me. Are you tired and worn out? So I opened my grades on that December day, which, by the way, I just have to say, Scott C is notoriously bad and known for grading, taking a very long time to grade. So that class happened in August, and I didn't get my grades until December 21st. And so when I opened those grades, I was so upset. I mean, a B minus, who gets a B minus? I'm a writer. I do not get B minuses on my papers, or so I thought. And another A minus on my transcript. I was livid. I was self-righteous, and I was incensed. And so I pulled out my phone like any normal person would do to text a friend. I wanted to text my friend Anne, who also knows Scott, is also very good friends with him. And I said in that text, I said, I am officially so furious with Scott. He gave me a B minus on the paper and an A minus for the course. And it's possible that there may have been some saltier words thrown in there, if you get my drift. And I confess it felt really, really good to let loose in that text. I knew Anne would understand, so I hit send. And that's when I realized I didn't send the text to Anne. I sent it to Scott. It was awesome. The panic that I felt was so real. The sinking in my stomach and the way my palms got sweaty, and I could feel the heat rising in my face as I realized what I had done. So of course, I immediately texted Scott a profuse apology. I explained that it was a text meant for someone else. I told him I was not at my best, and I was so very sorry. And you know what Scott did? Scott had the absolute gall to be wonderful about it. I mean, what a jerk. He said things like, I love that you sent that text to me. I think it's amazing that I got that text. He said, we cannot be in a relationship together if we cannot tell each other when we're upset with each other. Let's talk about your grade, he said. I'm open to hearing about it, but also it's okay if you get a B minus every once in a while. Sometimes even straight A students get B minuses, and it's okay. So let's talk. Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. So just a few weeks ago, I was back in Indianapolis to celebrate my graduation. And of course, dear Scott was one of 2 faculty members that my cohort and I invited to come to us for our celebration dinner after graduation. And let me tell you, the laughter that occurred at my expense as Scott and Anne read their texts for everyone to hear was immense and very well deserved, because good friends will always remind you that you are not perfect and loved anyway. The unforced rhythms of grace can come in waves of laughter, right? So, of course, this whole story always makes me think of Jesus, and it makes me think about this scripture in particular. Again, it's one of my favorites, because the truth is, I'm sure that I'm not the only one in the room who has this sickness of perfectionism. In fact, I think perfectionism runs a little rampant in our society, and it actually shows up in really harmful ways, not just individually in our relationships and in our own psyches, but collectively in society. For example, I know it's in the pressure that so many men feel to be good providers for their families, that if they are not providing well, they are somehow not only less manly, but almost less than human. And in fact, I've actually heard that said in a Christian Bible study, and that's really disturbing. This ethos that runs through Christianity of the Protestant work ethic, this idea that we are only as valuable as our productivity. I think we are missing something really important here. I think we are doing real harm to our men about when we give them this message about their inherent worth. Are you tired? Are you worn out? For so many of us who identify as women, we are told over and over again how we don't measure up to beauty standards, right? I've been paying a lot more attention to ads lately that are targeted toward me. And what I've noticed is that the first thing that they tell me is how ugly I am. They tell me that parts of me are either too big, too small, too saggy, too wrinkly, too thin, too thick, and that the obvious solution is for me to part with some of those dollars that I have to work harder for than my male counterparts, just by the way, and to part with those in order to pay for some cream or some diet or some workout that are going to fix the parts of me that are not enough. And by the way, we women, we also have the productivity sickness. So not only do we have to be hyper productive, but we have to look young and beautiful while we're at it. And if something goes wrong, we usually figure it's all our fault. It's really exhausting. Are you tired? Are you worn out? So those of us who are part of the LGBTQ community, we are told we don't fit in, we don't get to marry the people we love, or we're not fit to lead our churches, or to buy cakes at bakeries, or to teach our children. And I am appalled at how our society can justify the state sanctioned violence against my Black and brown siblings by insisting on some sort of arbitrary sense of perfection, by saying things like, he was doing something he shouldn't have been doing, or if he just obeyed commands, he'd still be alive right now. It's as though we expect that some ill-conceived idea of perfection is a requirement for the right to continue breathing. It's as if Black and brown bodies would, if they would only work harder to achieve this myth of perfection, it would somehow protect them from systemic police brutality. It's as if hearts only get to keep beating if the people who own them are always doing the right thing. And yet, if that were the standard, none of us would survive it. This is the weight of dominance. This is the weight of oppression. This is the harm that arbitrary perfectionism does. It is literally dangerous. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Another more popular translation of the scripture that's guiding us today says in part, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." You may have heard it said that way before. The word yoke here is a metaphor for what controls us. And it seems to me that for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we can choose. We can choose to be controlled by delusions of perfectionism, or we can take that ride on the unforced rhythms of grace. But to ride this wave of grace is really hard. Not because grace is all that hard to offer to others usually, but because grace is so often difficult to accept for ourselves. A few months ago, I came across a meme on social media that listed the 7 signs of internalized capitalism. And I realized that, as evidenced by my story about my less than perfect GPA, I have all of them. They include things like guilt for enjoying recreational activities, equating rest with laziness, and prioritizing work over relationships. Interestingly, scholars have pointed out that these qualities have also been identified as markers of the dominant white culture. These are qualities that keep us locked into our roles in oppressive systems of dominance. I think it's really important for us to be paying attention to this and to understand the ways in which these internalized narratives play out in our personal lives, in our life with God, and in the narratives that guide the collective society. In the work that I do in the world, which is primarily centered on racial justice, I have become fascinated with cultures of dominance and the identities that are dominant within them. So, for example, in American society, we have Christian dominance, we have patriarchy, we have whiteness, we have heteronormativity. All of these dominant identities are the ones that get to define what's perfect. It's not God, it's dominance. Beauty standards, for example, tend to be defined by straight white men. Sexual mores are defined by Christian heteronormativity, which is also usually defined by men. And make no mistake, this is not about demonizing men. Let me be absolutely clear, because men are harmed by these narratives as well, because the construct of male perfection is so narrow and the expectations for men are so toxic that the deep emotional and spiritual work that men have to do in order to ride those unforced rhythms of grace is to simply find themselves again, to discover who they actually are as they begin to recognize that the persona of toxic masculinity that has been thrust upon them by this society, by our churches, by our economic system, and by our entertainment is so limiting and so narrow. You know, Jesus dealt with a lot of toxic perfectionists too. And like most perfectionists, they were so embedded in the minutia that they started to miss the point. The religious leaders of his day were careful to watch every move he and his disciples made. I imagine the weight of their harsh judgment must have been heavy, crushing the joy out of the air. Imagine not being able to walk through a field on a sunny Saturday and snack on a piece of grain. Imagine being told, I'm sorry, you cannot be healed today because healing is labor, and labor cannot be performed on the Sabbath because God would approve more of your apathy on the Sabbath than of life-giving healing. That's twisted. Imagine that these few men were so entrenched in holding on to this power that they had over people, this systemic and institutional power, that these so-called holy men would rather arrange for Jesus to be murdered by agents of the state than tolerate his desire for freedom and collective liberation for himself and his people. Their twisted sense of what God asks of us, this idea that we must be perfect in order to be loved by God, disfigured their souls in such a way that not only were they not able to understand grace for themselves, but the external result of their perfectionism was nothing short of institutional murder on behalf of the state. It makes me wonder about all the people in our modern day American society, in our collective, that perfectionism loves to call not perfect. George Floyd wasn't perfect. He was on drugs. He resisted arrest, so he deserved to die. Breonna Taylor wasn't perfect. She had a record. Ahmaud Arbery went into that construction site. He wasn't perfect. Tamir Rice shouldn't have been playing with a toy gun in a park in our gun-loving, pro-violence society. Philando Castile, he did everything perfectly though, and yet we tried to say that he was negligent in his own death because he had THC in his system, as if no white person ever had THC in their system, as if the officer who fired in that nanosecond could have ever possibly known that, as if that even matters, as if that rendered him unworthy of a heartbeat. Are you tired? Are you worn out by this? Refugees at the border aren't perfect because they have not come here legally. Black Lives Matter aren't perfect because they should be nicer when they protest about their own oppression. Immigrants are not perfect because they speak more than one language and the first one isn't English. And yet, Jesus teaches us that it is the least of these. It is not the powerful, but it is the oppressed and the marginalized who have seen the truth of God. It is the oppressed and the marginalized who walk with God and talk with God. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. The thing is that we've all been oppressed by this stigma of perfectionism, but those of us who embody dominance, who practice it as a tool of oppression, don't realize that our own liberation is wrapped up in the liberation of those we oppress. Maybe if we could for once experience those unforced rhythms of grace for ourselves, maybe we would be able to offer them to our siblings and ride them to our collective liberation. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. When Scott burst my delusional bubble of perfection with those very annoying A minuses, I got angry. He had dared to make it clear to me that indeed I was not all that I thought I was. There was a vulnerable side to my identity that was based on a false construct, an impossible construct, and it made me angry to see it so clearly pointed out to me. Kind of, I think, the way I see some white folk get angry when we see Black Lives Matter signs. We get angry because that sign is really pointing out a whole lot of imperfections in our white society. The cross, by the way, does the same thing. If the cross that Jesus was hung on does anything, it points us right back at our own selves. It says, look, this is what you do to love and grace. Your imperfection needs to be protected and hidden at all costs. So we're going to vilify and torture and murder a man and make a mockery of him so that we can point to him rather than to examine our own selves. But Scott, he took a very Jesus-like stance with me after he poked my perfectionist wound and howled, and I howled in response and anger back at him. He said, come to me, walk with me, and let's work this out together. Let's be in relationship together. And sometimes you're going to get a B minus, and it will be okay. And you are still worthy of love. I am still learning this unforced rhythm of grace. I'm still learning how to offer it to myself, to receive it, so that I can in turn offer it to others. So as I close and as we leave today and as we go out into the world, I want to ask you a few questions to think about and mull over as you go through your week. The first is, where do you need to receive the rhythms of grace in your life? Where do you need to receive the rhythms of grace in your life? And where is your perfectionism making you vulnerable? And then most importantly of all, where is your sense of perfectionism making you a danger to others? Are you willing to receive those rhythms of grace for the sake of our collective liberation? Keep company with me, Jesus says, because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And with him, as a collective, we can truly live freely and lightly. May it be so.
Thank you so much, Kerry. I'm going to be moderating our discussion, which is always so much fun. And your message was so encouraging and so uplifting. It was just beautiful. I would like, before we go to our small group, can you, because this seems like it's like the beautiful, lovely fruit we can pick is this unforced rhythms of grace. Can you round that out for us and tell us what we could look forward to if we're really getting on that wave?
Oh, one of the things that I love about unforced, that phrase, unforced rhythms of grace, is that it's an open palm. It's not it's not anything that we have to force. It's not anything that we have to clutch onto. It is an act of ultimate surrender. It is an act of receiving. It is an act of the feminine divine, of receiving Holy Spirit's work in our lives. And that is something that I think is very difficult for us to do, especially in our culture, in our society. We feel like we are the ones who have to drive everything. We have to be perfect. We have to make things happen. We have to hustle. There is that narrative in almost, I've seen it in churches. I've seen it in business. I've seen it in school. Hustle, hustle, hustle. As if there were some way that we could hustle our way out of our pain and our loneliness and our fear, right? And we can. But when we have this open palm, when we have this attitude and an open heart, and we are able to receive, that's when this grace can begin to flow to us in beautifully profound ways that I don't think that we can understand or describe. I think when you've truly had one of those moments of grace, it's almost, it's an inspiring experience, and you can't necessarily put words to it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. That helps. So we're gonna go straight to our small groups and chat a little bit, and then come back and have some questions. And
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, oh, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Jordan's river is deep and wide. God's gonna trouble the water. Meet my friends on the other side. God's gonna trouble the water. I said, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Jordan's river is chilly and cold. God's gonna trouble the water. Chilled my body but not my soul. God's gonna trouble the water. I said, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, if I could, I surely would. Gonna trouble the water. Stand on the rock where Moses stood. God's gonna trouble the water. I said, wade in the water. Oh, wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Where Jordan's river is chilly and cold, God's gonna trouble the water. Chill my body, but not my soul. Water, wade in the water. Well, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, Jordan's river is deep and wide. God's gonna trouble the water. Meet my friends on the other side. God's gonna trouble the water. I said, wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Jordan's river's chilly and cold. God's gonna trouble the water. Chill my body, but not my soul. God's gonna trouble the water. I said, wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. All right, welcome back, everybody.
Thank you for that, Pastor. Always love to hear your voice. So Barbara and I got a chance to be together, so that was fun. So of course, we always talk about education when we get together, but I want to hear what others of you were talking about when you were in small group. There's so much here. So somebody unmute themselves and tell us what you guys were talking about. I mean, this idea of the weight of dominance. I mean, it's just, you know, we talk about individualism and we talk about, but the idea of using the word perfectionism, that's the first time we'd really used it before, but it's everywhere in our society.
Well, I shared an experience.
Yes, Gary, thank you.
I worked for the state in corrections, and one of the supervisors came back frustrated after an interview, and he said, I bet if I was a black or brown minority, I would have gotten that job, you know. And I had been on the list for probably 18 years by then. And when I started working there, I had a master's degree, 4 years of teaching, 4 years of counseling to become a youth counselor. And after all those years of being on the waiting list, you know, he said that. I said, well, point me to the line where the blacks and browns and minorities are getting these promotions because I ain't got it yet, you know. So I thought that was kind of funny. And my supervisors, by and large, had always been women, you know. Some of them nice, some of them not so nice, but pretty much all had been women. So, oh, and then finally in seminary to get the bachelor's and the master's degree, each time I was salutatorian and not valedictorian. And so, Kerry, I mean, I feel you, sister. I feel you.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Gary.
You're welcome.
I was going to say, I don't think I've ever considered how perfectionism, like I know how it can be dangerous for, myself, but I've never considered how it can be outwardly dangerous for other people. So that's a really interesting perspective to walk away from. So thank you for that.
There's perfectionism and the sense of urgency is another marker of white culture that feeds the perfectionism, that we have to do it and we have to do it really well and we have to do it really well right now. And I've seen that play out on church staffs, for example, in which staffs are worked to the bone because we have to have excellence for God. I've seen that happen in corporate environments as well, and it's also a way that dominant identities oppress and judge the marginalized. So.
Yeah, that was a super valuable insight. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Kind of a question and a comment. I also really I loved your talk because I could so identify with it. I know, if I'm being totally honest with myself, I really value hard work and this perfectionism in a sense. And, I do supervise people at work and I can even see it, but I'm struggling with how to change that. I think that's because I know it's generational. Like my mom and my dad they valued that. And I just was wondering if you could maybe speak to how you make that metamorphosis within yourself.
Yeah, prioritizing rest as an act of resistance, along with joy, is paramount to that. I think. I'm in I run my own business. I'm a solopreneur essentially. I have an assistant, but she's very, very part-time. And so I don't have employees. I don't have other people and so when the work gets intense, and I'm in an intense session of work right now, where clients are like calling on me, literally my phone has been blowing up with client work on a Sunday, right? And this is not church people. And I have to say, no, they can wait until Monday. And and I have to do it as an act of resistance. And here's the thing, what's crazy is that I didn't do that until I understood it as an act of justice. I never did it for myself. I only learned it. To be honest, I learned it from my Black friends, and I learned it as an act of justice and resistance of empire, that only I am in charge of how I give my time and attention away, and that I'm only going to do that with things that actually matter, and clients can wait. It's hard. It's a hard construct. It's a hard shift to make. But it's important. It's about people before profits. Dr. Robin Henderson Espinosa says that a lot, to give them attribution, but people before profits is really important. That's another thing that's really important.
Thank you. I never thought about it that way. I really like that a lot.
Yeah, during our group, I said I felt personally attacked because I always feel like I'm not doing enough, and rest is really hard for me. Like even just going to do our church meetup yesterday was really hard. I usually work through most weekends, and I think it's going to be helpful to think of it in the lens that you're talking about as an act of justice. Because when I think about resting for myself, that feels very selfish, especially because my mom, she worked 3 jobs growing up, so I never really saw her rest. So thank you so much.
Well,
I would love to just, if I could, just quickly point out that one of the narratives that that white dominance loves to, and white capitalism specifically loves to perpetrate, is that poor people are lazy. And yet most often poor people are working many more hours and doing harder labor than those of us who are not. And that's a narrative we need to push back on and wrestle with that.
Can I just say something really quick?
ahead,
Wow,
Rosie.
I absolutely enjoyed your message, first of all, okay? God bless you. God bless you, Sister Chingona, okay? And I say it in the most cariñoso, loving way, okay?
Thank you.
So, I wanna bring it from this other angle, okay? The reality, the historical reality of dominance is perhaps not stated in our lives of, you know, as people of color and even women. However, it is the evidentiality of our lives. And so we don't state it as such, but when we are in pockets amongst each other that we can let loose and just, you know, be free and grace to acknowledge, you know, what we live, we say it and speak it because we live it and feel it. So I needed to say that to validate that reality, that it is a known, I believe it is a known that we experience on a daily and have. It is a known that, yes, you know, growing up Chicana in a family that, hey, you know what, this is how we are viewed by dominant white society, as being lazy and not worthy and good enough. Therefore, we have to work 10 times harder. You know, if your job is, I remember my dad, God rest his soul, would say, if your job is that you are cleaning toilets with a toothbrush, then damn it, you clean them to the best of your ability, you know, and thank God that you have that job. You know what I'm saying? And it, like Ana Rosa was saying, you know, about the rest. Oh yeah. You know, I mean, thank God that I recognize it, and I am at fault for not trying to do more of it for myself, especially in my current situation. But now it's like I really feel like, you know, I could give a rat's ass what somebody else may think about, like, wow, gee, it must be really nice. You've got this time to just kind of kick back. It's like, shh, y'all don't know what I live, okay? So don't even try to judge me. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those words. Thank you. It's meaningful.
I think it really speaks to how completely ingrained in our person and our soul that these ideas are. And so, as she said, as Rosie said, and Rosie, we'd love to see your whole face. Where are you, girl? Can you move your can you move the phone down? There you are. There's that beautiful face. Just, you know, how, I mean, seems like it's going to be Kerry. It's going to be a lifelong journey to try and overcome this on a daily basis. I mean, you know, and I mean, I love to work. I mean, I put my kids right in daycare because I love to work. I love to be in the middle of it all, and I'm guilty as any of, you know, of the perfectionism. So I guess balance. I guess it gets to balance.
Well, I think, yeah, balance. I think balance, you have to be careful because balance can still sound like well, now I have to balance things perfectly, right? Um, so I think it's really, what it really has to be is, I don't got this, I'm like, this is, it's being okay with the mess and knowing that God is okay with that too. And just,
And to not let, when people lay a trip on you, like, don't let it get to you, I guess, is that, I don't know.
when they, what do you mean when they lay a chip on you?
Like, that you're lazy if you're not, doing, everything.
Well, I think that's when we turn around and we say, wow, we offer them some grace and say, wow, I'm so sorry that you're not able to rest, but this is where my boundary is, that becomes a boundary, and that becomes seeing their own humanity and their own struggle. And also I want to be very, I'm sorry, your name isn't on the thing. Is it Rosie who spoke earlier? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that is Rosie. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. To your point, I want to acknowledge the fact that as a white middle class woman, rest is easier for me than for a lot of people who don't have the time to rest. They have to work because they're paid. The economy that we live in means that they have to work. They don't get the luxury of rest, right? So I'm acknowledging that, and that's why we have to resist this paradigm, so that true justice means that rest is for everyone, right?
So are you suggesting that the fact that we had a picnic yesterday was an act of resistance?
Absolutely. Fun, joy, good food. An act of resistance. Absolutely.
Kerry said we could do it.
Oh,
Peter, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I really enjoyed your message, and what occurred to me is how we, even though none of us are perfect, and we really, if we really think about it, we all realize that. But I think we in a way we've sort of tricked ourselves into believing and identifying ourselves in that way, in a perfect way, and that, I think, arms us with judgment to others. So I really enjoyed your message. Thank you for speaking to us today. And I think, to me, it's just to be able to accept our own imperfectness is to acknowledge that nobody should be judged for that.
100%. Yep. Thank you for that.
Can I say something, please?
Well, Lisa's got her hand up still.
Oh,
Yeah, so we'll do Lisa, and then Gary will come right to you.
I just was, as we were talking, I was like, you know what? This is so important. So many of you are in education. This is so important to teach children and students when they're younger, so they can break the cycle more easily as they get older, because that's where we learned it. They started doing this to us young. And that's why these older people are having such a struggle, or these adults are having such a struggle with us changing things, because they're like, wait, we're messing up their whole world, and that is freaking them out, and it's scaring them. And so, of course, they call us lazy because we don't do things the way they do, because they don't understand it, because they've been so programmed that this is how you have to be in order to live correctly. So,
yep.
Go ahead, Kerry.
I was just going to say that I also do feel that the world has shifted in many ways, right? There are deep ways. I believe Holy Spirit is at work on the earth right now.